Your brother earned it, Dad told me. They handed him the house, the money, the business. A month later, Mom messaged, "Mortgage is due." I responded, "Ask your golden son." Full story plus updates. Okay, buckle up, because I have a story for you that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. Imagine giving your entire life, every ounce of your effort, to building something with your family, only for them to look you dead in the eye, point to your completely unqualified younger brother, and say, "He deserves it all. You get nothing." That's what happened to me. But 3 years later, when my phone buzzed with a desperate text from my mother, "Mortgage is due," my only thought was, what the hell happened next? That text, that pitiful cry for help, was from the very same mother who, along with my father, had handed my younger brother, Ryan, the multi-million-dollar construction company, our family home, and every investment account they had. "He deserves it all," they'd said, as if I hadn't spent 15 grueling years helping to build that empire while Ryan partied his way through his 20s. My dad's exact words to me, when he told me I was getting absolutely nothing, still echo in my head, "Your brother deserves it." Now, they were drowning in debt, and I was the last person they wanted to call. Growing up in our sprawling colonial home in the suburbs of Boston, I always felt like I was living in Ryan's shadow. Our family's legacy began with my grandfather, William Patterson, who started Patterson Construction from his garage in 1965 with nothing but grit and a pickup truck. My father, Thomas, took it over in the 90s, expanding it into a regional powerhouse. But the moment Ryan was born, when I was 7, everything shifted. I remember Dad's face lighting up in the hospital waiting room when the nurse announced, "It's a boy." He declared, finally, a Patterson to carry on the family name, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd existed for the past 7 years. From then on, the difference in how we were treated was subtle, but unmistakably clear. For Ryan's 5th birthday, he got a custom playhouse built by our company crew in the backyard. My 12th birthday, that same year, a cake and a bookstore gift card. When I brought home straight A's, Mom would just say, "That's nice, honey," before turning her attention back to Ryan C. in math, praising him for simply improving. My mother, Nancy, wasn't openly biased, but she enabled my father's favoritism. She was the peacekeeper, always trying to smooth things over, whispering, "Your father just has traditional values. He doesn't mean anything by it," after some particularly painful instance of his blatant favoritism. By high school, I'd developed a strategy, excellence. If I couldn't win their affection just by existing, maybe achievement would do the trick. I joined every business-related club, became president of the Future Business Leaders of America, and graduated salutatorian. Meanwhile, Ryan barely maintained a C average, spending more time at parties than in extracurriculars. One time, I overheard Dad talking to Ryan after he'd been caught drinking at a school dance. "Boys will be boys," Dad chuckled. "Just don't get caught next time." This was 3 months after I'd been grounded for a week for missing curfew by 15 minutes after a study group. When it came time for college, I chose business management with a focus on construction, not because it was my passion, but because I desperately hoped it would finally earn my father's respect. I wanted to show him I was serious about the family business. Ryan, on the other hand, bounced between 3 different majors before settling on communications because, you guessed it, it was easy. The summer before my senior year of college, I interned at Patterson Construction. I arrived early, stayed late, and absorbed everything I could about estimating, project management, and client relations. Dad barely acknowledged my presence, assigning me to filing paperwork, while Ryan, home from his sophomore year, was invited to client meetings and job sites. "Ryan needs to learn the business from the ground up," Dad explained when I questioned why my brother was attending executive meetings while I organized the supply closet. The irony was completely lost on him. Despite everything, I truly loved our family business. I saw its potential and genuinely wanted to be part of its future. Every summer and holiday break, I worked different positions throughout the company, learning the names of every employee, from accounting to the construction crews. I understood their concerns, their processes, their ideas for improvement. Christmas of my senior year, I presented Dad with a detailed business plan for expanding into green building practices. I'd spent months researching industry trends, tax incentives, potential client bases. He glanced at the cover, said, "We'll see," and set it aside. Later that night, he spent 2 hours teaching Ryan how to read blueprints, even though Ryan showed zero interest or aptitude. Mom tried to comfort me. "Your father just connects better with Ryan," she said. "He doesn't know how to relate to a daughter in business." I pointed out that several major construction companies in our area were run by women. She just shrugged and changed the subject. By the time I graduated, I had accepted that I would never be the favorite, but I was determined to prove my worth through results. I believed actions spoke louder than words. Looking back now, I recognize the naive hope in that belief. No amount of excellence can overcome entrenched favoritism, especially when it's reinforced by traditional gender expectations. Despite it all, I never gave up. Maybe that was my greatest strength or my biggest weakness. I refused to walk away from a family and a business that I loved, even when every sign pointed to the fact that my place in both would always be secondary to my brother's. I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college to pay for my expenses. Meanwhile, Ryan received a full ride from the bank of Mom and Dad, complete with a luxury apartment and a new car every 2 years. When I asked my parents why they wouldn't help me financially, Dad said, "You need to learn the value of hard work." As if Ryan didn't. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major. Ryan barely scraped by with a 2.3 GPA after 5.5 years. At my graduation dinner, Dad raised a toast to Megan, who always does things by the book. At Ryan's graduation 6 months later, he wept openly to my son, who will carry the Patterson name into the future of our business. When I officially joined Patterson Construction after graduation, I was placed in an entry-level estimating position despite my qualifications. My starting salary was lower than recent hires with less education. "You need to understand every aspect of the business from the ground up," Dad explained. 3 weeks later, Ryan was installed in a newly created Vice President of Client Relations role, complete with a corner office and company car. During my first year, I identified nearly $400,000 in potential savings through more efficient material ordering processes. I created a spreadsheet, tracked historical pricing, identified patterns, and negotiated better rates. When I presented my findings in a management meeting, Dad just nodded and said, "Interesting," before moving on to Ryan's presentation about hosting a company golf tournament. Despite the constant disappointment, I continued to excel. I became known among project managers as the person who could solve problems. Material shipments delayed? I found alternatives. Subcontractors failed to show? I had backups ready. I built relationships with everyone, from the receptionist to the lead foreman on our biggest projects. One particular project stands out. We were building a medical office complex with a tight deadline and substantial penalties for late completion. 2 months in, our project manager quit. Ryan was supposed to step in, but he was on a 3-week European vacation with friends. Dad was in a panic until I volunteered to take over. I worked 14-hour days for 6 weeks straight. I renegotiated with subcontractors, reorganized the construction schedule to optimize crew time, and personally supervised critical phases. We completed the building 2 days ahead of schedule and under budget. The client was so impressed they immediately contracted us for their next expansion. At the completion ceremony, I stood in the background while Dad and Ryan, who had retired just in time, cut the ribbon. The client CEO specifically asked for me, shook my hand, and said, "This wouldn't have happened without you." Dad overheard, looked momentarily uncomfortable, then clapped Ryan on the shoulder and declared, "The Patterson men know how to deliver." Meanwhile, I lived modestly in a small 1-bedroom apartment. Ryan purchased a waterfront condo using his executive compensation package. I brought lunch from home and drove a 10-year-old Honda. Ryan expensed client lunches and drove a company-leased BMW. I'd built my savings. Ryan accumulated credit card debt that my parents periodically paid off. The company continued to grow, largely due to the systems and client relationships I developed. I created a new division focusing on sustainable construction that attracted prestigious clients concerned about environmental impact. These projects carried higher profit margins and built our reputation as an innovative firm. Dad took credit for the initiative in industry publications, despite having initially dismissed my proposal. Ryan's contributions were less tangible. He was the charming face at charity galas and golf tournaments. He smiled beautifully in company marketing materials. When he did manage projects, they typically ran over budget and behind schedule, requiring other managers, usually me, to step in and salvage them. During my 5th year with the company, we faced a major crisis. A significant commercial project was on the verge of collapse after Ryan approved design changes without calculating the structural implications. The client was threatening legal action, and our reputation was at stake. Ryan, predictably, was conveniently sick the week this all came to light. I spent 2 weeks negotiating with architects, engineers, and the client to find a solution. I secured additional financing, brought in specialized subcontractors, and personally supervised the remediation work. The project was saved, albeit with reduced profit. When the dust settled, Dad called me into his office. For a moment, I actually thought recognition was finally coming. "You've done good work cleaning up the situation," he said. "But in the future, consult with me before making financial commitments of this magnitude." Ryan made a mistake, but he's learning. We need to support him while he grows into his role. I sat there, stunned into silence. 10 years of dedication, and I was still being treated as subordinate to my brother, who couldn't even be bothered to show up when things got difficult. That night, I seriously considered leaving the company for the first time. But I'd invested so much of myself in Patterson Construction that walking away felt like admitting defeat. Besides, where would I go? This was the family business. My business, too. Or so I thought. The evening that changed everything began normally enough. Mom invited Ryan and me to Sunday dinner, saying Dad had an important announcement. I assumed it was about the new office building we were planning, or perhaps the expansion into the commercial real estate market I'd been researching. I arrived 15 minutes early as usual, bringing a bottle of Dad's favorite scotch. The house I grew up in looked the same as always, immaculately maintained, a 4-bedroom colonial with a Patterson Construction sign proudly displayed near the driveway. 25 years of business success had allowed my parents to add a sunroom, swimming pool, and extensive landscaping to the property I still thought of as home. Ryan arrived 20 minutes late, offering no apology. Mom fussed over him as if he'd returned from war rather than a short drive from his condo. Dad beamed with pride when Ryan mentioned he'd just put a deposit down on a boat. No one asked about my recent successful negotiation of a contract that would secure work for the company for the next 3 years. During dinner, Dad cleared his throat and raised his glass. "I've been thinking about the future of Patterson Construction," he began. "I'm not getting any younger, and it's time to plan for succession." My heart quickened. This was the moment I'd been working toward. After 15 years of dedication, surely Dad recognized my contributions, my commitment. "Your mother and I have decided it's time to start stepping back from day-to-day operations," he continued. "We want to travel, enjoy our golden years, and watch the business continue to thrive under new leadership." I sat up straighter, mentally reviewing the transition plan I'd been quietly developing for years. "Therefore," Dad said, turning towards Ryan, "we've decided to transfer ownership of Patterson Construction to Ryan, effective immediately." The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table. "Additionally," Dad continued, as if he hadn't just shattered my entire world, "we'll be transferring the house and our investment accounts to Ryan as well. He'll need these assets to secure the company's future growth." "What about Megan?" Mom asked quietly, the first indication that perhaps this hadn't been a unanimous decision. Dad barely glanced my way. We're offering Megan a generous severance package in recognition of her years with the company. 3 months' salary and her company car. That's it. I finally found my voice, shaking. 15 years of my life, and I get 3 months' pay while Ryan gets everything. Your brother deserves it, Dad said firmly, his tone indicating the matter was settled. He's a Patterson man. The company should stay with the family name. I'm a Patterson, too, I said, my voice rising. Until you marry, Dad replied dismissively. Besides, Ryan has a vision for the company's future. Ryan smirked across the table. Don't worry, sis. I might find a place for you in the new organization, maybe in HR or something. My jaw clenched. I looked at Mom, hoping for support, but she just stayed at her plate. We just want what's best for the company, she murmured. What's best for the company? I stood up, knocking my chair backward. Ryan doesn't know the first thing about running this business. He can't read a balance sheet. He's never completed a project on time. And half the crews refuse to work with him because he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's enough. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This decision is final. The paperwork has already been prepared. Did you ever intend to include me in the company's future? I asked, tease threatening. Dad's expression softened slightly. Megan, you're smart. You'll land on your feet. But Patterson Construction needs a Patterson at the helm. It's tradition. A male Patterson, you mean? I said bitterly. Don't make this about gender, Ryan interjected. It's about who Dad trusts to carry on his legacy. I looked around the table at my family. Dad, resolute in his decision. Mom, unwilling to challenge him. Ryan, barely containing his triumph. 32 years of trying to prove myself, of loving people who would never value me equally, crashed down around me. Congratulations on your retirement, I said coldly to my parents. And congratulations on your inheritance, I added to Ryan. I hope you all get exactly what you deserve. I walked out without looking back, ignoring my mother's calls to return. In my car, I finally let the tears come. Not just for the lost inheritance, but for the recognition I'd never receive, for the wasted years trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. The next morning, I submitted my resignation, effective immediately. Dad called, not to apologize, but to remind me about the non-compete clause in my employment contract. You can't work for any competitor within 100 miles for 2 years, he said, as if that was his primary concern. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied, before hanging up. I cleared out my office on a Sunday when no one would be there. 15 years of work fit into 2 cardboard boxes. As I took one last look at the company I'd helped build, I made myself a promise. I would never again allow my worth to be determined by someone else's inability to see it. The first month after leaving Patterson Construction was the hardest. I rented a furnished apartment in Chicago, as far from Boston as I could reasonably go while still staying in the construction industry. Each morning, I woke up questioning my decision. Each night, I reminded myself that staying would have slowly destroyed my soul. I allowed myself 2 weeks to grieve. I cried. I screamed into pillows. I wrote scathing letters to my family that I never sent. Then, I got to work rebuilding my life from scratch. My severance package barely covered my first month's rent and security deposit. I dipped into my savings to minimally furnish my apartment and set up my new business, Patterson Consulting. Keeping my name was a small act of defiance. I created a website, business cards, and a LinkedIn profile emphasizing my experience without mentioning it was a family business. Cold calls and networking events became my daily routine. I introduced myself to everyone in the Chicago construction industry. Most doors remained firmly closed. Construction consulting from an unknown woman in a male-dominated industry wasn't an easy sell. My first client came through pure desperation. Theirs, not mine. A mid-sized developer had fired their project manager mid-construction and needed immediate help. The project was 3 months behind schedule and significantly over budget. I offered to work for a reduced fee with a bonus structure tied to getting the project back on track. For 6 weeks, I worked from 6 a.m. until midnight. I renegotiated with subcontractors, reorganized the construction schedule, and identified costly mistakes in the original plans. By the end, we had cut the delays in half and identified enough savings to offset the previous overruns. The developer was impressed enough to refer me to 2 colleagues. Suddenly, I had a small client base and positive references. I created a niche for myself, the construction consultant you call when things go wrong. I marketed myself as a problem solver rather than competing directly with established project management firms. 4 months into my new venture, I received a call from Martin Chin, Patterson Construction's former head estimator. I quit, he announced without preamble. Ryan fired Dolores and Jim last week. Said they were too expensive after 30 years with the company. I couldn't stay after that. Martin filled me in on the changes Ryan had implemented. Experienced project managers replaced with his fraternity brothers. Reliable subcontractors dropped in favor of cheaper alternatives. The sustainable construction division I'd built dismantled because Ryan thought it was too complicated. The place is falling apart, Martin concluded. Your father is trying to keep his hands off, but he looks physically ill every time he visits the office. I thanked Martin for the information, but maintained my boundary. Their business was no longer my concern. Still, I couldn't help but feel validated by the news. It wasn't personal satisfaction I felt, but professional vindication. The skills and knowledge I brought to Patterson Construction had been valuable, whether my family recognized it or not. As my first year in Chicago progressed, so did my business. I hired 2 assistants and moved into a small but professional office space. I developed a reputation for honesty and results. Unlike my father, who believed in hierarchical management, I created collaborative relationships with clients. I explained my recommendations clearly and involved them in decisions rather than dictating terms. This approach resonated particularly well with female developers and project owners, a growing demographic in the industry. By my 15th month in Chicago, I had a waiting list of clients and was considering expanding my team. Meanwhile, updates from former colleagues painted an increasingly dire picture of Patterson Construction. Ryan had secured several large contracts by underbidding competitors, not realizing the projects would operate at a loss. Quality issues emerged as inexperienced managers failed to properly supervise subcontractors. 2 major clients had filed lawsuits over delays and defects. I maintained professional distance from these problems, but I couldn't help feeling a twinge of sadness. Patterson Construction had been my grandfather's legacy. Hundreds of families depended on the company for their livelihoods. Ryan's mismanagement wasn't just hurting our family, it was affecting innocent employees who had been loyal for decades. One evening, I received an email from Barbara, my parents' neighbor for 20 years. She wrote that there were rumors about my parents experiencing financial difficulties. Their country club membership had lapsed, and they had canceled their annual vacation. The company trucks no longer had the Patterson logo prominently displayed. Instead, they were plain white with minimal identification. I nearly called my mother that night, but stopped myself. They had made their choice. They had entrusted everything to Ryan, believing that sharing their DNA and gender made him more worthy than my years of demonstrated competence. Whatever consequences came from that decision were theirs to bear. Instead, I channeled my energy into growing my business. I expanded into preventative consulting, helping developers avoid the costly mistakes I'd seen repeatedly in troubled projects. I developed a training program for new project managers based on practical experience rather than textbook theories. I hired 3 more consultants, all women with extensive construction experience who had faced